In this module, we examine Cambodia, 30 years after the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge left the country broken and disoriented. Although rebuilding progress has been made, is the current government facilitating that progress, or is Cambodia the beneficiary of good economic fortune? What about the future for Cambodia? We'll examine these issues and more in this module. In the late 1960s, the U.S. was deeply involved in the Vietnam War. Although Cambodia had declared itself a neutral territory, the Viet Cong communists were using Cambodian soil for their camps. Prince Norodom Sihanouk of Cambodia knew this, but tolerated it because he feared escalation. In 1969, under pressure from the U.S., Cambodia changed its stance, and the communists were no longer welcome. Around the same time, the U.S. also launched Operation Menu, a secretive bombing campaign that dropped some 100,000 tons of bombs in Cambodia. The shock and confusion of the bombings enabled the emergence of the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge was led by Pol Pot, and his coup d'etat was met with little resistance. Survivor accounts recall the Khmer Rouge soldiers explained that the mass city evacuations that began in 1975 were because, quote, the Americans were coming. Pol Pot's goal, as was later learned, was not to protect the Cambodians from an imminent American invasion, but actually to return Cambodia to what he called, quote, Year Zero, and transform it into an agrarian utopia. Parents were tainted with capitalism, he believed, so children were separated from their parents and brainwashed to socialism. Panhiri Lee, a killing fields torture camp survivor and now the namesake for the Panhiri Lee Foundation, a non-government organization that works with children's health and education issues in Cambodia, tells graphic stories of how she and other children at the time were made to watch executions and torture. The Khmer Rouge's killing fields systematically purged Cambodia of educated city dwellers, monks, and minorities, while imposing a draconian resettlement program that uprooted almost everyone else. Ultimately, these measures led to the deaths of 1/4 of the country's population, an estimated 2 million people. The devastation Pol Pot wreaked on his country remains hard to comprehend, even 3 decades later. These photos show the notorious Tul Sleng Camp, or S-21, in Phnom Penh. It was a high school turned into a prison camp 4 months after the Khmer Rouge took control of the government. The camp is now a museum and is open to the public. While Pol Pot died in 1998, the much-delayed tribunal for the surviving members of the Khmer Rouge regime began with the trial of Kang Duc Eve, better known as Duc, on February 19, 2009. Duc led S-21 and is alleged to have presided over the torture or murder of 15,000 inmates. Nun Chia, at 82 years old, is the senior-most surviving member of the Khmer Rouge regime and one of its principal architects. He was arrested in 2007 and awaits his trial. It would seem that with the arrests and the trials now underway, that Cambodia is indeed on the path to recovery. Is it, though? The current government is certainly not leading a genocide, but the impunity, corruption, and human rights violations are still commonplace. Foreign Affairs is a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization that since 1922 has been dedicated to improving the understanding of U.S. foreign policy and international affairs through the free exchange of ideas. Joel Brinkley of Foreign Affairs explained in an article, quote, "While much of Cambodia and the world holds on to memories of the country's sorrowful past under the Khmer Rouge, few seem to notice that the government of Prime Minister Hun Sen is destroying the nation." Prime Minister Hun Sen and his government seem to get away with everything. There have been sometimes violent land seizures, as well as alleged misuses of money, use of intimidation practices, and looting of natural resources. Suspicious drive-by shootings in broad daylight are raising eyebrows at the UN and World Bank, as well as with the international community. In July 2008, two men speeding by on a motorbike shot and killed Kim Sabur and his 21-year-old son as they walked down the street. Kim was a reporter for the Khmer Conscience, an opposition newspaper, and not surprisingly, the paper had been writing critically about the government. There were no arrests and no investigations. That is true for dozens of apparent contract killings in recent years, just like that one. Journalists, political activists, labor union leaders, gone. No one has proven that the government is behind the killings, but the world is beginning to publicly question them. Citing the deaths of trade union leaders, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said in a report last year that the incidents were, quote, emblematic for what they revealed about impunity for crimes which appear to possess a political dimension. In its 2009 report on the state of Cambodia's economy, the World Bank acknowledges, quote, corruption remains widespread in its many forms. And to think, Hun Sen was recently re-elected to another 5-year term. The problems with impunity in the government aren't just with Hun Sen, but extend to his family as well. Hun Sen's nephew, Hun Chia, has a long record of recklessness and impunity. Hun Chia was involved in an accident in August 2008 where he ran over Sam Sabo in his SUV, amputating the man's arm and leg. The police, who arrived on the scene, according to the Phnom Penh Post, were heard reassuring Hun Chia that it was the biker's fault, while the biker bled to death in the street. The Hun family gave the victim's family $4,000, and the case was dropped. Hun Chia has also been involved with multiple firearm incidents. As blogs and international press reached a fever pitch around his impunity, Hun Chia was arrested on February 25, 2009, after another firearm incident at a nightclub in Phnom Penh.